Hey, Jaap, Kalkman here from Skeena Fly Zone. Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to do the first episode of a series that is going to be all about steelhead in the Skeena region. I'm going to go over the equipment that I use on a typical day of steelheading. So without further ado, here we go. The first thing that I use a lot in my fishing here in the Skeena region is my boat. I'm going to do a separate episode that's all about how the layout of my boat is, what type of a boat, what's a good boat to have here for steelheading in the Skeena region. On an average day of steeling, I usually have 3 rods rigged up in the boat. One rod I rig up for dry fly fishing, one rod is rigged up for fishing light tips, and one rod is rigged up for fishing heavy tips. I prefer 8-weight rods for most of the rivers in this area. Sometimes I use a 7-weight, but the bulk of my rods are in 8 weights. The length of the rod can vary anywhere from an 11.5 foot switch rod to maybe 14-foot rods for rods that need more reaching work and more mending. I like my dry fly rods a little bit longer. So this here is my dry fly rod that I have rigged up today. It's a Berkheimer. It's 14 foot 3 inches or 2 inches. And it's for an 8-weight. I rig it up with a Skeena head as long as possible. I like 40 foot heads. For my dry fly fishing, or sometimes I use mid-belly lines. For a reel, I use a reel with a good drag system and a reel that's reliable and dependable. It can be any kind of reel, but I prefer reels with a good drag system so I can handle fish quick and don't have to tire them out too much, and I have full control over it that way. This reel is a Guideline Quadra reel. It's one of the older models and still perfectly functioning. I usually spool my reels up with maybe 200-300 yards of braid in 60 to 80 pounds, depending how much fill I need. For a running line, I use Guideline Comp line. I love that running line. I've tested many running lines, and these are by far the best I have found. And some of these running lines have been on my reels for 7, 8, 10 years, and they still are doing just fine. Another note about the fly lines. I prefer fly lines that are made of polyurethane. Polyurethane doesn't crack over time, unlike PVC, which will crack. I do a lot of fishing and my rods are in the sun a lot of the time. So in a couple of seasons my lines are usually done when they're made of PVC because they start to crack. I believe Airflow makes most of the polyurethane lines. So I fish those quite a bit. And Guideline lines are also made of polyurethane, at least most of their models. So today I have a Skeena head rigged up on this dry fly rig, and at the end of the line I usually use a long, maybe 15 foot tapered leader, and at the end of the tapered leader I attach 3 foot or so of tippet material, 12 pound, and that's my leader. For a dry fly I use one of my seekers, either a dark variation or the light variation. And that's what I always use to search. It doesn't need greasing. It always rights itself and stays up in heavy currents very well. It's good visible and it tracks excellent. I insert the hook upside down in the rear of the tube. And the hook has a slight up eye, about 15 degrees. When you press that slide up eye into the tube, then what results is that the bend of the hook hangs below the fly like a keel, and the point is in line with the tube. It results for excellent hookups and very good tracking of the fly. My second rod is also an 8-weight rod. This is a 14-footer for an 8-weight Bob Miser rod. But really I use any kind of brand that I have laying around or I'm trying out. As long as it's an 8-weight between 12.5 and 14 foot. This rod also has a Scandinavian style shooting head on it, which has a multi-tip system, so you can switch different density tips. And I use my tips on these lines usually from intermediate to type 8. And those is what I would call my light tip rod, which I fish with a Scandinavian style shooting head. Today I got a 15-foot type 6 tip on here, and then I usually do 4 or 5 feet of leader material, just a straight piece of monofilament, 12 or 15 pound. And for a fly on this rig I have my basically bread and butter fly, which is an egg-sucking Rhea Stinger. And for the third rig, I'm using this Guideline NT8 rod today, and I have it rigged up with a Skagit head. For my heavy rod with fishing heavy tips, I always use Skagit heads because they're a bit more suitable for that. This is an 8-weight rod as well. And I put about 15 feet of T13 on there, sometimes a type 8, something like that, or T14. Again, I put maybe 4 or 5 feet of leader material at the end, and on this rod I have a pink Rhea Stinger. Now a little bit about how I fish my rod line combinations. I prefer to fish my lines quite light compared to most people, I think, from what I see. For the Scandinavian style rods and lines, I usually match them up. If it's an 8-weight Guideline rod, then I match it up with a 8-weight Scandi shooting head. For the North American rods, like the Berkheimers and the Bob Misers and the Sage and what have you, I usually like to load those a little bit lighter than recommended. That way the rod becomes a little bit faster. Most of those like Berkeys and Misers are quite slow, and by reducing the line weight a little bit, you get a little bit more speed back, so you can fish Scandi style heads on those more North American Skagit style rods. The next thing that I always have with me is a little boat bag. This is a mangrove boat bag. I like this a lot. This has been all over the world with me, and this is maybe my third one. I use them hard and I like them. In the boat bag I usually keep a wallet with all my tippets, spool of 15 and 12 pound nylon, a fly wallet that is full with all my flies, and got hooks in the side. I really like these wallets. They're from Finsport, and to carry the bulk of my flies I like that wallet. I have usually a in-reach spot with me for communication, and then that's about it. That's in my little boat bag. Then I always have a net in my boat. I like these telescopic nets. They come out when you slide this forward, and that way it doesn't get in the way in the boat with more people in there, and it's nice and tidy. They're made by Fabril. I like them, and they hold up. I've had this one for many years. Then for my pictures I always have a DSLR in my case, a kind of Pelican waterproof case, small, with a couple of extra batteries and stuff, so that it can be banged around without damaging your camera. Then for wearing my waders, these are a pair of Sims waders. I've used all kinds of brands, and if you can find one that doesn't leak, then you got a good one. Then I usually have on my zipper of my breast pocket here on my waders, I tie these pieces of junction tubing. When I fish with my tube flies, I just they're handy then, and I can clip just a section off. Then the other thing that I always have with me is this lanyard, and on the lanyard I have forceps to get hooks out and to pinch barbs down, a little clipper to clip off nylon, a little knife, a file to sharpen my hook points when they get dull, and a little tool to do nail knots. And then the last thing that I carry with me is a little box that has just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight slots for the flies that I'm using that day. I put a few hooks in there, spare hooks, and I always drill holes in the top so that the flies can dry out. And then I usually have a cap on to keep the sun out, and I always have a pair of really good polarizing sunglasses. And that's it for all the equipment that I use on average steelhead day here in the Skeena region. Hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up on the video, and please subscribe and keep your waders wet.